What happens when a king finally reaches the breaking point? When years of patience, politeness, and diplomacy crumble under the weight of public accusations and private betrayals. Picture this: King Charles, sitting in the grandeur of Buckingham Palace, a handwritten statement from his grandson and his wife clutched in his hands. Every word burns. Every sentence cuts. And the world outside, the millions watching, have no idea the storm that is about to erupt behind these palace walls. This is not just another royal disagreement. This is a confrontation that could reshape the monarchy itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all started with an interview. A bombshell, one that sent shockwaves through royal circles and left advisors scrambling. Prince Harry, the youngest son of the king's late mother, the beloved Diana, went on record claiming that his wife, Meghan Markle, had been bullied by members of the royal family during her time as a working royal. He painted a picture of cruelty, exclusion, and relentless scrutiny. He spoke of her struggle, of the emotional toll, and of the fear that haunted her every public appearance. The world listened, gasped, and sympathized. Social media exploded. News outlets ran headlines that seemed impossible. The royal family, known for its dignified restraint, had allegedly turned its back on one of their own. But behind the cameras and the polished interviews, the palace was boiling. Those who had dedicated their lives to service were watching, horrified, as private family matters were broadcast for the entire world to see. The statement was not just a claim, it was a challenge. It questioned the very character of the institution, the very legacy King Charles had spent decades trying to preserve. How could a monarchy survive when one of its most famous members claimed that its walls were hostile, even cruel? King Charles, in his quiet, measured way, rarely shows his fury. He's known for patience, for letting matters simmer until the proper moment to act. But this was different. He could feel the sting of betrayal in a way that went beyond public image or media scrutiny. This was personal. His family was under attack, and his role as king demanded not only a response, but a decisive one. He had to protect the monarchy, the crown, and the dignity of generations that came before him. But how do you confront your own grandson in a situation where emotions are raw? The public eye is relentless, and every move you make could be twisted into scandal. Inside the palace, advisors convened urgently. They whispered in hallways, sent discreet notes under doors, and held emergency meetings in rooms where portraits of past monarchs seemed to watch their every move. The atmosphere was tense, electric, almost suffocating. Each person there knew that whatever decision was made in the next 24 hours could either protect the royal legacy or shatter it irreparably. And yet, even in the midst of this tension, no one could predict what Charles would do next. No one. Meanwhile, the world outside was captivated. Millions had tuned in to watch Harry and Meghan's interview, but even they could not imagine the full scope of the consequences it would unleash. Headlines screamed about bullying, toxicity, and royal drama. Social media became a battlefield. Commentators debated endlessly. Was Harry right? Was Meghan a victim? Or was this a deliberate attempt to reshape their narrative and elevate their fame? And while the world argued, the palace prepared. Behind closed doors, a storm unlike any other was building. Think about the pressure on Harry. He had gone public with his claims, expecting support and understanding. He had hoped the world would rally behind him and his wife, and in many ways, they did. But what he hadn't fully anticipated was the magnitude of the backlash from the institution itself. He had crossed a line, at least from the perspective of the monarchy, and the response would not be gentle. The king was not a man to be provoked lightly, and this was no ordinary provocation. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, found herself at the center of a hurricane. She had endured scrutiny from the very beginning of her royal journey. Every outfit, every public appearance, every smile or frown was analyzed, dissected, and judged. The palace had never been easy on outsiders, and Meghan, as an American divorcee stepping into centuries of tradition, faced challenges many could not imagine. Yet, according to Harry, the treatment she received went beyond what anyone could justify. The claims were severe: exclusion from meetings, snide remarks, social isolation, and an environment so toxic it left lasting emotional scars. But in revealing these experiences, they also exposed the family to unprecedented public judgment, and that is where the tension escalates. Now, imagine Charles reading the interview, line by line. The words were like daggers, piercing not just his professional pride, but his very heart. He had loved Diana, the mother of Harry and William, and he understood the scrutiny that came with the family name. He had always tried to maintain dignity, discretion, and a sense of moral authority. But now, his own grandson was accusing the family of cruelty, of creating an environment unfit for anyone, let alone a young woman devoted to duty. How does a king respond when the family name he has spent decades defending is being tarnished by those closest to him? This is where the story gets truly fascinating. Because Charles's reaction would not just be words. It would be action, a decision that would ripple through the monarchy, through the media, and through history itself. And while the world speculates, the palace prepares for the storm. Advisors anticipate backlash, aides brace for media scrutiny, and security measures are quietly adjusted. Every detail, from phrasing in statements to the timing of public releases, is meticulously calculated. Nothing is left to chance. Nothing. But there's a twist. Even as Charles strategizes, he is dealing with personal emotions that threaten to cloud judgment. The tension between familial love and royal duty is palpable. How does a king balance mercy with authority, compassion with accountability? And in a world where every gesture is scrutinized, every word dissected, the stakes could not be higher. So what comes next? How does a king confront accusations that cut to the core of his family's integrity? What decisions will he make that could forever alter the relationship with his grandson and his granddaughter-in-law? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for the monarchy in an era where public opinion and media influence wield more power than ever before? By the end of this story, you will not only witness a family in crisis, but also understand the lengths to which a monarch will go to protect his legacy. You will see betrayal, tension, emotional confrontations, and decisions that will leave the world reeling. Every move, every statement, every private conversation plays a role in a narrative far more dramatic than any public scandal. And just when you think you understand the gravity of the situation, just when you think the storm has reached its peak, the palace drops a revelation so shocking that it redefines everything. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is a king making a decision, a statement, and a move that will forever be remembered in royal history. So buckle up. Prepare for insider details, unprecedented disclosures, and moments of sheer emotional intensity. Because the story you are about to witness does not follow the usual rules of public drama. It exposes the raw, unfiltered tension behind palace walls. And it all begins with one interview, one claim, and one furious king ready to act. They say every storm begins quietly, almost imperceptibly. But some storms arrive with a force that shakes the very foundations of everything around them. In the royal world, storms are usually managed behind closed doors, smoothed over with carefully chosen words and gestures. But the storm that hit Buckingham Palace after Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's explosive interview was different. This was not a whisper behind curtains or a subtle rebuke. It was a seismic shake to the institution itself. And at the heart of it all, the king, Charles III, felt every tremor. It started the moment the palace communications team realized Harry's statements were going public. The room went silent as aides processed the interview, each line more alarming than the last. Harry had claimed that his wife, Meghan, had been bullied during her time as a working royal. Not just slight slights, not just subtle cold shoulders, bullied. Publicly. On the record. The word itself carried weight, a severity that demanded attention. And the implications? They were catastrophic. King Charles, known for his quiet composure, rarely allowed emotions to cloud his judgment. But when he read the interview, there was a flicker in his eyes, an unmistakable blend of disbelief, frustration, and hurt. This was not just an attack on Meghan or even Harry. It was, in his eyes, an attack on the monarchy, a questioning of the very principles he had upheld all his life. The palace walls, steeped in centuries of tradition and history, suddenly felt like they were closing in on him. Every portrait of past monarchs seemed to echo silently, reminding him that leadership was as much about endurance as it was about diplomacy. Advisors scrambled. Meetings were convened in hushed urgency. Security protocols were reviewed, not because of a physical threat, but because the statements had sent shockwaves through public perception. Staff whispered in corridors about the unprecedented nature of the accusations. Some were worried about the reputational damage. Others feared the emotional toll on the king himself. The room was electric with tension, a mix of fear, anticipation, and uncertainty. No one had a clear playbook for this. No one had faced such a direct, personal, and public challenge from a family member of this stature. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan were watching the unfolding reactions. The couple likely assumed the palace would issue a measured, diplomatic response. Perhaps a statement defending tradition while subtly acknowledging their claims. But what they didn't anticipate was Charles's approach, the quiet, simmering fury of a man who had spent decades navigating scandal, rumor, and scrutiny with patience. This was a king who knew when to strike, and he was preparing his move carefully, meticulously, and with the full weight of authority behind him. The public, meanwhile, had their own reactions. Social media erupted. Hashtags trended globally. Commentators debated endlessly on TV, podcasts, and online forums. Was Harry justified? Was Meghan a victim? Or were they manipulating the narrative for attention and influence? For every sympathetic voice, there was a critic ready to pounce. The royal family had always been public figures, but never before had an internal accusation of this nature been presented so openly and so explosively. Inside the palace, the sense of urgency was palpable. Advisors worked around the clock, drafting potential statements, preparing contingency plans, and coordinating with communications teams. Each scenario was dissected. What if the public rallies behind Harry and Meghan? What if the monarchy is viewed as cruel or indifferent? What if this sparks a deeper familial divide? Every possible outcome was weighed with precision and caution. The king's inner circle knew that any misstep could have enormous consequences. Charles's reputation, the stability of the monarchy, and even the future succession plans were all at stake. They understood that once a story like this breaks, it doesn't just affect those involved. It shapes public opinion, influences global media narratives, and even impacts diplomatic relations. Every word, every gesture, every pause mattered. And the pressure on Charles? Immense. But this wasn't just about public perception. It was deeply personal. Charles had lost his mother at a young age, understood the relentless scrutiny of the public eye, and had long been cautious about protecting his family. To have his grandson publicly claim bullying within the royal household was not just a challenge. It was a betrayal in the deepest sense. It questioned the integrity of the very institution he had been preparing to lead for decades. The emotional weight of it, combined with the professional ramifications, created a storm that was unlike any he had faced before. As the hours passed, the palace became a hub of strategic planning. Advisors debated late into the night, weighing every option. Some argued for a measured, conciliatory approach, appealing to family unity while subtly defending the monarchy. Others pushed for a firm, unequivocal response, a reminder that the monarchy could not be publicly questioned without consequence. Every opinion carried weight. Every argument was charged with emotion. And at the center of it all, Charles listened, absorbed, and considered. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate among the staff. Some felt sympathetic toward Harry and Meghan, understanding the pressures and isolation that come with life in the public eye. Others felt loyalty to the king, believing that family matters should remain private and that airing grievances publicly was a breach of trust. The palace had always been a place of hierarchy and protocol, but now it was a battlefield of emotions and allegiances. Who supported whom? Who stayed silent out of fear? And who spoke up? These dynamics added another layer of complexity to an already tense situation. Harry, on his end, may have underestimated the magnitude of the reaction. From his perspective, he was standing up for his wife, speaking the truth about her experiences and expecting understanding. But from the perspective of the monarchy, he had crossed a line. The king's patience had limits, and the sanctity of the royal family could not be questioned publicly without consequences. This miscalculation, intentional or not, was about to set the stage for a confrontation of historic proportions. And Meghan, caught in the eye of the storm, faced her own challenges. Her public image, already scrutinized for every move and word, now carried the added weight of controversy. She had allies in the media and among fans worldwide. But within the palace, the tension was palpable. Allies were limited. Support was conditional. And the sense of isolation that she had sometimes felt as a new member of the royal family was intensified exponentially. The storm, though still unseen by the public in its full scope, was gathering strength. Charles was planning, calculating, and preparing a response that would be decisive, shocking, and unforgettable. Every advisor, every staff member, every family member knew that the next steps would define not just the immediate future of Harry and Meghan, but the legacy of the monarchy itself. And as night fell over London, a quiet, almost eerie tension settled across Buckingham Palace. The world outside buzzed with speculation, but inside, history was being written in whispered conversations, closed-door meetings, and carefully drafted statements. Charles's mind worked tirelessly, weighing personal feelings against public duty, love against loyalty, and forgiveness against authority. But the question on everyone's mind, from the palace staff to the millions watching from around the globe, was simple and terrifying. What would the king do next? Would he choose mercy, diplomacy, or a decisive action that would leave Harry and Meghan reeling? And perhaps most importantly, how far would this royal storm go before it finally broke? Every palace insider knew one thing. When Charles speaks, the world listens. And when Charles acts, even the most daring challenges can crumble. Harry and Meghan had just tested that resolve, and they were about to find out that a king's fury is not something to underestimate. The moment Prince Harry and Meghan Markle went public with their claims, the world reacted with shock. But inside the palace, the reaction was something far more intense. Headlines screamed about bullying, toxicity, and family betrayal. Social media exploded. News outlets ran stories that spun the narrative in every direction, some sympathetic, some condemning. But the real fallout wasn't just in public opinion. It was happening behind palace walls, in hallways and offices where loyalty, fear, and frustration collided. For Meghan, the accusations were both a release and a risk. Speaking out was empowering. Finally, the world could hear the truth about her experiences. But the backlash was immediate. Friends and critics alike questioned her motives. Was this a genuine plea for understanding, or a calculated move to reshape her image? Some argued that Meghan had broken the unspoken code of royal discretion. She had aired grievances that families, even royal families, typically handle behind closed doors. And in doing so, she had ignited a firestorm that no one could control. The palace staff watched nervously as the story unfolded. Those who had worked closely with Meghan sometimes sympathized, recalling moments of tension or miscommunication, subtle snubs that might have escalated into larger conflicts. Others felt frustrated, even betrayed. To many, the public accusation felt unnecessary. The palace had always operated under a principle of discretion and decorum. Private disagreements were managed quietly. Now, the air was thick with uncertainty. Staff whispered about the ripple effects, how this would affect morale, public perception, and the already fragile balance within the family. The king's advisors, meanwhile, were scrambling to assess the damage. They had long understood the delicate nature of royal relationships, but nothing in recent memory had prepared them for an accusation so public, so direct, and so damaging. They debated, argued, and strategized around the clock. Some urged a cautious, measured response, acknowledged the claims, expressed concern, and emphasized the monarchy's commitment to fairness and compassion. Others argued for a firmer stance, emphasizing authority, tradition, and the importance of maintaining respect for the institution. Every option carried risks, and every risk could affect the monarchy's stability, both in the UK and around the world. Meghan's claims also reverberated beyond the palace. Supporters across the globe rallied, sharing personal stories of bullying and systemic oppression, drawing parallels to her experience. Influencers, celebrities, and activists amplified her voice, framing it as a battle against entrenched hierarchy and privilege. This international attention added a new layer of complexity. The monarchy was no longer just a domestic institution. It had become a global spectacle, its every move scrutinized by millions of eyes. But not everyone was on Meghan's side. Critics questioned her timing, her motives, and even her credibility. Some accused her of exaggeration or manipulating media attention for personal gain. Rumors spread, some true, some speculative, about palace life and the dynamics between staff, royals, and Meghan herself. For the Duchess, the exposure was a double-edged sword. Speaking out gave her a platform and a voice, but it also painted a target on her back. Every action, every public appearance, every word would now be dissected in light of the bullying allegations. Inside the palace, Harry's defense of Meghan added another layer of tension. His unwavering support was admirable in many eyes, but it also intensified the conflict. Publicly, he was seen as protective, even heroic. Privately, advisors worried that his loyalty could exacerbate the rift. Every interview, statement, and social media post became a potential flashpoint. And the longer the story remained in the public eye, the greater the pressure on Charles to respond decisively. Meghan herself felt the strain. Isolation and scrutiny, once managed through careful public appearances, now seemed inescapable. Even allies within the palace were cautious, unsure whether supporting her openly would compromise their positions. She had allies, yes, but they were limited, fragmented, and often hesitant. The emotional weight of the situation was enormous. Meghan had to navigate not just the public narrative, but the intricate web of palace politics, family expectations, and the intense media glare. Adding fuel to the fire were subtle leaks from insiders, anonymous sources, and palace aides. Some claimed to provide context, others to sensationalize. Reports surfaced suggesting that Meghan had clashed with staff, that her demeanor had caused tension, that she had struggled to adapt to royal protocols. Each report, regardless of its accuracy, compounded the narrative of conflict. The Duchess found herself fighting not only for her public reputation, but also for the truth behind every allegation, every rumor, and every headline. The media coverage was relentless. Every broadcast, article, and social media post dissected her every action and word. Critics and supporters alike scrutinized interviews, analyzing body language, tone, and facial expressions. Some framed her as a victim, others as a manipulative outsider. The constant attention created pressure not just on Meghan and Harry, but on the palace staff and advisors tasked with maintaining the monarchy's dignity. Every misstep, every poorly worded statement, had the potential to escalate the situation further. The fallout extended into personal relationships within the royal family. Charles, William, Kate, and other senior royals faced a delicate balancing act. They needed to protect the monarchy while managing family dynamics strained by betrayal and public accusations. Trust was fragile, and communication became more strategic than ever. Conversations were layered with caution. One wrong word could inflame the situation, deepen divisions, and generate new controversies. The emotional toll was immense, leaving even the most seasoned family members tense, wary, and cautious in every interaction. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's public image continued to evolve. Supporters praised their courage, framing them as champions of transparency and accountability. Critics framed them as opportunists seeking to elevate their personal brand at the expense of tradition and family unity. Both narratives influenced public perception, media coverage, and even international commentary. Every appearance, post, and statement was scrutinized for underlying motives and hidden messages. The couple was now navigating not just palace politics, but global optics, each move carrying enormous consequences. Even charity work and public appearances were now filtered through the lens of controversy. Meghan's initiatives, once praised for their innovation and impact, were now questioned. Supporters lauded her efforts as bold and necessary. Critics dismissed them as performative or strategically timed to distract from negative headlines. The Duchess faced an unrelenting cycle of praise and criticism, admiration and suspicion, a complex balancing act few could manage, and one that tested her resilience daily. At the same time, Harry's loyalty intensified the scrutiny. Every protective comment, every public statement of support, magnified the tension. The couple's united front, intended to demonstrate strength and solidarity, paradoxically highlighted the divide with the rest of the family. Advisors warned that continued public defense could backfire, deepening the rift and inviting more speculation. Yet Harry persisted, driven by his commitment to Meghan and a desire to assert his agency within the family dynamic. All the while, the monarchy's public image was at stake. Polls suggested a mixture of sympathy for Meghan and concern for the institution. Public trust, already fluctuating in modern times, faced additional strain. Advisors and communications teams worked tirelessly to craft messages, manage optics, and anticipate every possible interpretation of statements or actions. The stakes were monumental, not just personal relationships, but the very perception of the royal family worldwide. And then came the whispers, rumors of closed-door meetings, secret correspondences, and strategic consultations among advisors. Everyone knew a response from the king was coming, but no one knew exactly what form it would take. Would it be a measured acknowledgement, a firm rebuke, or something more drastic? Every palace insider waited with bated breath, knowing that the coming days could define the monarchy's future and irrevocably alter the relationship between the king, his grandson, and the Duchess of Sussex. The tension was almost unbearable. Meghan had exposed what she believed was a profound injustice, a toxic environment that had left lasting scars. But the revelation also illuminated the fault lines within the family, the palace staff, and the institution itself. Loyalty, duty, compassion, and strategy collided in ways that few could navigate without misstep. And as the world watched, unaware of the full complexity behind the headlines, the palace prepared for a reckoning that was inevitable, imminent, and potentially historic. Every moment that passed amplified the urgency. The longer the accusations remained unaddressed, the greater the potential for long-term damage. And while Meghan and Harry braced themselves for continued public scrutiny, inside the palace, a decision was forming, one that would challenge the couple in ways they could not yet imagine. The fallout from Meghan's accusations was far from over. Allies, critics, media, and family members all waited, each anticipating the king's response. And when that response finally arrived, it would shock, astonish, and leave consequences that stretched far beyond palace walls. He rarely raises his voice. He rarely loses his composure. King Charles III has spent decades mastering the art of patience, of restraint, of carefully measuring every word, every gesture, every public appearance. Yet when he read the interview, line by line, word by word, the simmering storm inside him surged into full fury. This was no ordinary challenge. This was personal. His grandson had accused the family of cruelty. His granddaughter-in-law had aired grievances of bullying that called into question not only the behavior of individual royals, but the integrity of the monarchy itself. The words stung. They cut deep. Charles felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on him, reminding him that the crown is not just a symbol of power, but of responsibility, dignity, and the expectation of moral authority. To have that authority questioned, challenged, and publicly undermined by his own blood was a provocation unlike any other. The king's fury was quiet at first, simmering beneath the surface, but the advisors who observed him knew, when Charles's temper ignites, the results are decisive and lasting. The palace, a fortress of centuries, suddenly felt smaller. Hallways that had echoed with ceremonial footsteps now vibrated with tension. Every aide, every secretary, every advisor moved cautiously, aware that the king's mood had shifted. Some whispered in corners, wondering if Charles would issue a measured, diplomatic response. Others feared the consequences of underestimating his resolve. And yet, no one dared ask directly what he intended. In the royal world, protocol and discretion reigned supreme. But even the most loyal insiders knew that history was unfolding in these very rooms. Charles retreated to his private study late one evening, away from the prying eyes of staff and the glare of cameras. The weight of responsibility was suffocating. He stared at the portraits of past monarchs, George VI, Queen Elizabeth, his mother, and wondered how they would have reacted. He thought of the expectations placed on him, the legacy he had inherited, and the family unity that now seemed fragile at best. And in that quiet, solitary space, his fury crystallized into clarity. The monarchy could not be challenged in this way, and he would act decisively to defend it. Advisors scrambled to interpret his mood. Some argued for caution, emphasizing the importance of diplomacy and measured statements. They reminded themselves that the public had shown sympathy for Meghan and Harry, and that any harsh response could be perceived as vindictive or cruel. Others argued that firmness, clarity, and authority were essential. The king's words, they insisted, must leave no room for misinterpretation, no question of who held ultimate responsibility. Debate raged behind closed doors, but Charles remained focused. He listened, considered, and weighed every option, knowing that one wrong move could escalate the crisis beyond control. Meanwhile, the media continued to fan the flames. Newspapers ran headlines that read like war declarations: royal family accused of bullying, palace in crisis, monarchy under siege. Social media was even more unrelenting. Supporters of Harry and Meghan rallied behind them, while critics attacked the couple's decision to go public. The king was aware that every word, every glance, every nuance would be scrutinized. The palace's response had to be perfect, both in tone and in substance. But perfection is elusive when emotions run this high, and fury burns hot beneath a calm exterior. Inside the palace, Charles convened a private meeting with his closest advisors. The air was thick with tension. Some argued for a conciliatory approach, expressed concern, acknowledged the claims, and emphasized the family's commitment to support and unity. Others pushed for a more forceful response, a public statement, a reaffirmation of royal authority, a clear defense against accusations that could erode public confidence. Charles weighed each perspective, but ultimately, his decision would not be dictated by strategy alone. It would be guided by principle, history, and a deep, personal sense of betrayal. The fury was not only professional, it was deeply personal. Charles remembered Harry as a boy, full of energy, charisma, and potential. He had watched Meghan join the family with cautious optimism, aware of the challenges she would face as an outsider entering centuries of tradition. And yet, the public accusations suggested that these relationships had soured in ways he could barely comprehend. How could his grandson claim that the family had bullied his wife? How could these private grievances be made public, threatening not just individuals, but the very institution he had sworn to protect? Even within his inner circle, emotions ran high. Advisors spoke in hushed tones about loyalty, reputation, and the legacy of the monarchy. Some expressed anger at Harry and Meghan's audacity. Others feared the long-term implications for public perception and family unity. Charles listened to every word but relied on his instincts. Instincts honed over decades of navigating scandals, crises, and criticism. He knew the monarchy demanded not just leadership but authority, and authority could not be undermined, even by those closest to him. In private moments, Charles reflected on the nature of the accusations themselves. Bullying, exclusion, and emotional manipulation. These were serious claims, and they deserved scrutiny. But he also knew the palace had its own perspective, one shaped by protocol, tradition, and the expectation that public decorum must be maintained. The tension between truth and perception, personal loyalty and institutional duty, created a complex web that the king had to navigate with care, yet decisively. Charles's fury manifested in action. Meetings with advisors became more urgent, statements were drafted and redrafted, and contingency plans were meticulously considered. Every potential reaction from Harry and Meghan, every possible media response, every public interpretation was analyzed. The king understood that the longer this situation lingered, the more dangerous it became. Delay was not an option. Clarity and authority were essential. The family dynamics were equally strained. William and Kate, observing the unfolding crisis, were caught between loyalty to the king and empathy for Harry and Meghan. Siblings and extended family members struggled to navigate a landscape where every comment could be interpreted as support or opposition. Trust, once taken for granted, became fragile. Conversations were cautious, measured, and laced with subtext. Even simple exchanges carried emotional weight, and the palace atmosphere was tense, fragile, and charged with unspoken conflict. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan remained unaware of the full scope of Charles's response. They likely assumed the king would issue a carefully worded statement, perhaps expressing concern but avoiding confrontation. What they could not anticipate was the scale and decisiveness of his fury. Charles was a man shaped by history, tradition, and a deep sense of duty. When provoked, he acted not impulsively but with calculated force, a force designed to preserve authority, protect legacy, and demand respect. The king's fury also had symbolic weight. Every monarch before him had faced challenges, scandals, and public criticism. But never before had a direct accusation of bullying been leveled at the family so publicly. Charles understood that how he responded would set a precedent, not just for this generation, but for those to come. The stakes were immense. Reputation, family unity, and the monarchy's long-term stability were all on the line. As the hours turned into days, the anticipation grew. Advisors worked tirelessly, staff whispered anxiously, and the public speculated endlessly. Every palace official understood that history was unfolding, that a decisive moment was approaching, and that the king's response would define not just this incident, but the very perception of the royal family for years to come. And then came the moment that changed everything. Charles, after careful deliberation, after weighing personal feelings and public duty, made a decision that would reverberate far beyond the palace walls. It was a decision that sent shockwaves through advisors, stunned family members, and left Harry and Meghan facing consequences they could never have imagined. The fury of a king, once unleashed, is not easily contained. And when Charles finally acted, the consequences were immediate, undeniable, and irreversible. They say kings may rule, but advisors guide. And in the case of King Charles III facing the explosive claims from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the advisors were at the epicenter of a storm unlike any other. Inside the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, a cacophony of whispers, strategy debates, and tense conversations unfolded. Every word mattered, every opinion carried weight, and every recommendation could tilt the outcome of this royal crisis. The advisors knew the stakes. A single misstep could destroy public confidence in the monarchy, fracture the family further, or create a narrative that would haunt the institution for generations. They had witnessed scandals before, rumors, leaks, public misbehavior, but nothing as direct, personal, and publicly visible as this. Harry had accused the family of bullying Meghan. The accusation alone was seismic. Its implications were even greater. Advisors understood the delicacy of the situation. The king's authority, the family's reputation, and the very perception of the monarchy hung in the balance. In the inner sanctums of the palace, discussions were urgent, tense, and sometimes heated. One advisor argued that the king must respond carefully, emphasizing empathy and compassion. "We cannot appear cold or indifferent," they warned. "Public perception will crush us if we show anger without understanding. We must show humanity." Another countered sharply, emphasizing the need for decisiveness and authority. This is not merely about perception. This is about control, tradition, and respect. If we do not respond firmly, the monarchy risks losing its grip. The debate raged, each perspective a reflection of the tension between public duty and private loyalty. Some advisors leaned toward diplomacy, proposing a careful, calculated statement, acknowledging Meghan's claims without admitting fault, expressing concern for her well-being, and reaffirming the family's commitment to unity. Others argued for a sterner, more unambiguous response, insisting that Harry and Meghan's public statements challenged the very foundation of the institution. "We cannot allow the monarchy to be publicly questioned by family members," one senior aide insisted. "If we do, we set a dangerous precedent." The emotional toll on the advisors was immense. Many had devoted decades to serving the royal family. They had witnessed crises before and navigated them with finesse, discretion, and a commitment to the crown. But this was different. This was deeply personal. It was not just a scandal or misbehavior. It was an accusation against the family, the staff, and the very culture of the palace. Every advisor felt the pressure. Every choice carried consequences, not just for the monarchy, but for themselves personally. The secrecy of these discussions added another layer of complexity. In a palace where trust is sacred, every conversation was measured, every word calculated. Advisors worried about leaks, about media misinterpretation, about how the smallest comment could become global news. And yet, the tension was palpable. The advisors were not just strategists. They were witnesses to a historic unfolding, balancing loyalty to the king with concern for the family and the public image of the monarchy. One senior advisor, who had served the family for decades, described the atmosphere as electric with tension. Meetings were often punctuated with silence, as each person weighed the weight of their words. Discussions about potential responses were thorough, sometimes exhausting. Advisors drafted multiple statements, reviewed them line by line, and debated the subtle nuances of phrasing. Every word, they knew, could be weaponized. Every nuance could be interpreted as support, opposition, or negligence. Meanwhile, some staff members were quietly sympathetic to Meghan's plight. They had seen her struggle with the pressures of royal life, the isolation, and the scrutiny. Yet even allies knew that their support had limits. Speaking out too loudly could compromise their positions or be misinterpreted as disloyalty. The advisors had to navigate this delicate balance, protecting the monarchy while acknowledging personal experiences, maintaining authority while demonstrating empathy. It was a task fraught with complexity. Advisors also had to consider the international implications. The monarchy is not just a domestic institution, it is a symbol recognized worldwide. Every statement, every response, would be analyzed not only in the UK but across Europe, the United States, and beyond. Diplomats, media analysts, and global observers were watching closely. Missteps could have ripple effects, influencing perceptions of the monarchy in ways that extended far beyond palace walls. The advisors were painfully aware of the king's emotions. Charles's fury was not hidden, it was restrained but palpable. They had learned over the years that when the king feels this way, actions follow. Calm, measured deliberation gave way to decisive moves. And they knew that when Charles finally acted, it would be swift, calculated, and irreversible. Their role, therefore, was not just advisory. It was to prepare the ground, to anticipate every outcome, and to ensure that the king's actions would achieve their intended effect. In private conversations, some advisors voiced concern about Harry and Meghan's motivations. Are they speaking from genuine experience, or is this a calculated move for influence and public attention? One asked. Another replied, "It doesn't matter. The public believes it, and that's the reality we must manage. The narrative is out of our control." These debates reflected the tension between perception and reality, truth and optics, a tension that advisors had to navigate constantly. The advisors also had to consider the broader family dynamics. William and Kate, senior royals, were caught in the crossfire. They were loyal to the king, yet empathetic to Harry and Meghan. Their influence, while significant, was also constrained by protocol and the hierarchy of authority. Advisors debated how to involve them without escalating tensions, how to balance empathy with authority, and how to present a united front while addressing a fractured family. One particularly tense meeting involved reviewing potential media scenarios. Advisors played through every possible outcome, headlines framing the monarchy as cruel, interviews portraying the king as indifferent, social media campaigns fueling division. Each scenario required a preemptive response strategy. The advisor's role was to think 3 steps ahead, anticipate reactions, and prepare contingency plans that could protect the family and the institution simultaneously. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, small leaks and whispers began to emerge. Staff who had seen tension firsthand offered anonymous insights to journalists. Some accounts supported Meghan's claims, others defended the palace. The advisors had to account for these leaks, managing both the narrative and the perception of loyalty within the staff. It was a delicate balancing act. Every revelation could ignite another wave of public scrutiny, and advisors had to be vigilant at every step. As the days passed, the king's decision became inevitable. Advisors prepared briefing papers, drafted responses, and rehearsed potential public statements. Yet they knew that no preparation could entirely predict the emotional intensity or family fallout that would follow. The king's authority, the couple's reaction, the public's perception, all were variables in a complex equation that advisors had been tasked with managing. Some advisors expressed fear for the long-term implications. If this escalates, it could redefine how the monarchy is perceived for generations, one remarked. Others countered, emphasizing that strong action now could restore authority, clarify boundaries, and protect the institution. The tension between caution and decisiveness defined every conversation, every recommendation, and every private reflection. The advisors were more than strategists. They were witnesses to history. They observed the king's restraint, his fury simmering beneath the surface, and they understood the magnitude of the moment. They knew that once Charles acted, Harry and Meghan would face consequences that could reshape their public and private lives forever. The advisors' own reputations, their careers, and their loyalty were all intertwined with the outcome. Every detail mattered, every decision was critical, and every moment was charged with tension. And then, in a private, tightly controlled meeting, the king made his intentions clear. The advisors, who had debated endlessly, strategized for hours, and anticipated countless scenarios, realized that Charles's decision would be swift, unambiguous, and irreversible. The fury of a king, they understood, is different from public criticism or media backlash. It is authoritative, deliberate, and final. The palace, the family, the staff, and the advisors all braced for the consequences. Every move made in the coming days would echo through history, defining relationships, reshaping reputations, and challenging assumptions about loyalty, authority, and family. And while the world waited for a public statement, behind closed doors, the advisors knew that the storm was about to hit, in a way no one could have predicted. The world had heard Harry and Meghan's claims, and the palace had reacted with shock, strategic planning, and a simmering fury. But Harry was not done. In private and in public, he prepared a response, a rebuttal that was measured in some ways, yet pointed, strategic, and designed to maintain his and Meghan's narrative. The young prince, once seen primarily as a figure of royal charm and charisma, was now positioned as a man defending his wife, his family, and his version of the truth. The rebuttal began quietly, behind the walls of Frogmore Cottage, where Harry and Meghan had retreated. There, away from the prying eyes of the palace, they worked with their advisors, legal teams, and communications experts to craft a response that would address the growing speculation. Every word, every sentence, every nuance was scrutinized. The goal was clear: defend Meghan, uphold their perspective, and retain public sympathy without provoking the monarchy further than necessary. Harry's first priority was to frame the narrative around protection. He emphasized that his actions were motivated by love and concern for Meghan. "This is not about blame," he reportedly said in private meetings with aides. "It's about highlighting the reality she faced, so no one else goes through it." The choice of words was deliberate. By framing the situation as a protective measure rather than a confrontation, Harry aimed to retain moral authority in the eyes of the public while signaling to the palace that his intentions were not malicious. But even in this controlled environment, Harry's rebuttal carried an undercurrent of defiance. He could not ignore the implicit challenge: the king's fury, the advisor's strategic maneuvers, and the palace's insistence on discretion. The rebuttal had to navigate a tightrope between respect and assertion, diplomacy and confrontation. It was a balancing act that required precision, patience, and calculated risk. Publicly, Harry's team released statements carefully worded to maintain sympathy while highlighting the key points of their original claims. Interviews were scheduled selectively, designed to reinforce the narrative of concern for Meghan and to underline the challenges she faced. Social media posts, philanthropic appearances, and media engagements were strategically timed to coincide with the public discussion of bullying and treatment within the royal household. Every detail, from tone of voice to facial expression, was analyzed and optimized for maximum impact. Behind the scenes, Harry also reached out privately to allies within the palace. He sought support, guidance, and reassurance, knowing that internal dissent could influence the public narrative. Some family members offered quiet counsel, while others remained distant, wary of taking sides in a dispute that threatened to escalate. Even these private interactions were fraught with tension, as trust had become a rare commodity. Harry understood that each conversation, each private note, could shape the unfolding story and potentially the monarchy's reaction. As the rebuttal took shape, Harry faced an additional challenge: the public perception of loyalty and betrayal. Critics accused him of undermining the family for personal gain, while supporters praised his courage. The media coverage was relentless, amplifying every nuance of his statements. Analysts dissected body language, tone, and phrasing, seeking evidence of sincerity, manipulation, or exaggeration. The weight of public scrutiny was enormous, but Harry appeared determined to control the narrative, using every tool at his disposal to ensure that Meghan's perspective remained central. At the same time, legal advisors warned Harry about potential repercussions. Defending Meghan publicly while criticizing palace procedures or treatment could be interpreted as defiance or even insubordination. The balance between truth-telling and strategic diplomacy was delicate. Harry's rebuttal had to assert his position without crossing a line that could provoke direct legal or familial consequences. It was a dance of words, perception, and timing, each misstep carrying potential ramifications that could escalate tensions further. The emotional dimension of the rebuttal was equally significant. Harry was not only defending Meghan publicly, but also processing his own sense of frustration, anger, and disappointment. He felt torn between loyalty to the monarchy, love for his wife, and the moral imperative he perceived in exposing wrongdoing. These conflicting emotions informed every decision he made, every interview he gave, and every statement he authorized. It was a constant negotiation between personal conviction and strategic calculation. Harry also anticipated countermoves from the palace. He knew that Charles's advisors would be monitoring public response, analyzing statements, and preparing potential rebuttals of their own. Every word he released was, therefore, preemptive, defensive, and carefully measured to avoid immediate escalation while keeping the narrative in his favor. Advisors worked to simulate potential scenarios, considering how the palace might respond, what the media would highlight, and how public sentiment might shift. The strategy was comprehensive, meticulous, and high-stakes. Internally, Harry was clear about his priorities. First and foremost was protecting Meghan's reputation and well-being. Second was maintaining their credibility in the public eye, ensuring that the narrative of bullying, mistreatment, and isolation remained central. Third was controlling the optics of the monarchy's response, anticipating backlash, and preparing contingencies. The rebuttal was not just reactive, it was proactive, designed to assert agency, control perception, and preserve moral high ground. Harry's approach combined emotion and strategy. In interviews, he spoke with calm authority, yet moments of visible frustration and emotion underscored the sincerity of his claims. He leveraged storytelling, sharing specific anecdotes, subtle yet vivid, to highlight challenges Meghan faced. Humor and irony were interspersed strategically, humanizing the couple while emphasizing contrasts between public perception and private reality. These techniques were designed to maximize engagement, maintain audience sympathy, and reinforce the narrative of authenticity. The rebuttal also extended to global audiences. Harry understood that the monarchy's influence was worldwide, and he carefully calibrated statements for international media. Allies abroad were briefed, sympathetic journalists were engaged, and social media campaigns were orchestrated to ensure consistent messaging. The goal was to create a perception of integrity, courage, and moral clarity that transcended borders and resonated with a global audience increasingly attuned to issues of fairness, inclusion, and transparency. Yet the palace did not remain passive. Leaks, strategic statements, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering created counter-narratives, challenging Harry's framing and questioning the accuracy of his claims. Advisors released subtle messaging emphasizing tradition, family unity, and decorum. Every public interaction by Charles, William, and Kate was interpreted as a signal, a negotiation, or a veiled response. Harry's rebuttal, therefore, was part of a broader chessboard, each move anticipating, countering, or provoking palace strategies. Emotionally, the stakes were intense. Harry was defending his wife, his choices, and his version of the truth, yet he also faced the personal weight of estrangement, judgment, and familial tension. Each interview, each statement, each public appearance was a test of resilience, patience, and strategic discipline. The pressure was relentless, the scrutiny unending, and the consequences potentially lifelong. Harry's rebuttal culminated in a carefully orchestrated series of interviews and statements, each designed to reinforce the narrative, maintain public sympathy, and highlight discrepancies between palace portrayal and personal experience. The approach was deliberate, assertive yet empathetic, strategic yet personal, emotional yet measured. It was a balancing act few could execute successfully, yet Harry navigated it with a combination of instinct, preparation, and determination. And yet, for all the strategy, preparation, and careful messaging, Harry could not predict the king's next move. Charles's fury, advisors' plans, and the palace's capacity for decisive action loomed like a shadow over every statement. Harry's rebuttal may have been powerful, persuasive, and globally visible. But it was only one part of a larger, far more complex story unfolding behind the walls of Buckingham Palace. As the world watched, Harry stood firm. He had crafted a rebuttal designed to defend, to clarify, and to assert agency. But the monarchy was not a static institution, and its response would be swift, deliberate, and calculated. The tension between public perception and private consequence, between loyalty and defiance, had never been greater. And as Harry's rebuttal circulated globally, advisors in the palace realized one thing: the king's decision was imminent. The consequences for the couple, for the family, and for the monarchy would soon become clear. And when that moment arrived, it would shock the world in ways no one, not even Harry, could have anticipated. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle made their accusations public, the world reacted immediately, but what followed went beyond mere discussion. It became a media frenzy, a global spectacle that no one could escape. Headlines splashed across newspapers, social media feeds erupted, and 24-hour news channels dissected every word. The narrative of bullying, isolation, and family tension ignited debates, arguments, and viral commentary, drawing in millions across the globe. It wasn't just news, it was a cultural moment, and everyone had an opinion. The outcry was instantaneous. Some people rallied behind Harry and Meghan, calling the couple courageous for speaking out. They framed the story as a necessary revelation of an institution struggling to modernize and protect new members. Advocates of mental health, anti-bullying campaigns, and social justice movements weighed in, praising the Duchess's bravery and critiquing the palace for its handling of personal relationships and protocol. Supporters created online campaigns, hashtags, and viral posts celebrating transparency, fairness, and moral courage. But not everyone was sympathetic. Critics were vocal, scathing, and relentless. Some accused Harry and Meghan of exploiting the monarchy for attention or financial gain. Others suggested the accusations were exaggerated or fabricated, intended to manipulate public perception. Social media became a battlefield. Comment sections overflowed with arguments, memes, and heated debates. Some argued that the couple was revealing truths that had been hidden for decades. Others insisted that the monarchy was being unfairly vilified. Every tweet, post, and article amplified the tension, making it impossible to separate opinion from fact. Traditional media outlets intensified the frenzy. Television stations ran 24-hour coverage, often re-airing the same clips, interviews, and analysis, creating a cycle of constant commentary. Newspapers published multiple pieces a day, offering perspectives from royal correspondents, former palace insiders, and social analysts. Some stories were investigative, revealing new details about palace life and relationships. Others were speculative, often quoting anonymous sources to add intrigue. The result was a perfect storm of narrative, gossip, and drama, an uncontrollable wildfire of public opinion. The global reach of the controversy was staggering. Audiences in the United States, Europe, Asia, and Australia engaged passionately, sharing their thoughts, reactions, and predictions. International media framed the story in their own contexts, often highlighting cultural differences in perceptions of royalty, family dynamics, and public accountability. This international attention heightened the stakes for the monarchy and the couple, transforming what might have been a domestic family dispute into a global media event. Public opinion polls reflected the polarized reactions. Some surveys indicated sympathy for Meghan and Harry, highlighting the public's concern over treatment of new royals, isolation, and bullying. Other polls showed support for the king and the palace, emphasizing tradition, loyalty, and the belief that private family matters should remain private. Analysts noted that public perception was fluid, shaped by media framing, social media discourse, and unfolding events. The tension between empathy for the couple and respect for the monarchy created a volatile mix that would influence every response moving forward. In the midst of this media storm, palace communications teams worked feverishly to manage narrative, anticipate public response, and prepare statements. Every interview, every public appearance, every social media post was scrutinized for tone, content, and potential fallout. Advisors debated whether to intervene directly or let public sentiment evolve, recognizing that each move could either calm the storm or exacerbate it. The constant scrutiny created pressure, tension, and a sense of urgency within the palace that advisors and staff had rarely experienced at this intensity. Celebrity commentary added another layer. Public figures, influencers, and journalists weighed in with opinions, critiques, and analyses, often framing the story in ways that reinforced existing narratives. Some praised Harry and Meghan for bravery and transparency. Others criticized them as opportunistic and divisive. The intensity of commentary, amplified by millions of followers on social media, turned the couple's experience into a cultural flashpoint, further blurring the line between personal grievance and global spectacle. The frenzy also influenced media coverage of other royal events. Every appearance of Charles, William, Kate, or other senior royals was dissected for body language, demeanor, and subtle cues. Analysts speculated on family relationships, loyalty, and potential future moves. Even minor gestures, smiles, pauses, eye contact, were interpreted as statements, adding to the relentless scrutiny. Every moment in public was now an opportunity for media narratives to evolve, for speculation to